Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in this NetBase Quid Live session. Can you quid that? Quid as a tool in the R&D toolbox. I'm Harvey Raniola, Director of Demand Generation at NetBase Quid, and leading this session today is Jamie Sens. She's the Information Specialist for the Global Supply Chain R&D team at Sherwin-Williams.
All right. Thank you, Harvey. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this great event. And thank you to all of you for your time today as we talk a little bit about Quid as an R&D tool. And so without further ado, let's get started. As Harvey mentioned, I am the Information Specialist for the Global Supply Chain Organization at Sherwin-Williams. And I think if we talk a little bit about my roles and responsibilities and sort of what I do at Sherwin, I think that will help set the stage for and sort of inform our conversation about Quid as an R&D tool and viewing Quid through that R&D lens. And so as Information Specialist, I have a number of different things that I get to do and ways that I get to assist our folks. And some of those responsibilities do include some very traditional, if there is such a thing as traditional librarian types of jobs these days. Information Specialist is one of the many names that people use for librarian in this information age. And so some of the things that I do at Sherwin for our R&D folks is library resource management, maintaining all of the R&D resources that our folks need to do that are part of R&D. So journal subscription, search databases, making sure that we've got access to the things that we need to get that work done. Assist with literature reviews, so another very sort of traditional library role as our folks are trying to understand technologies and technology spaces. My job is to help them understand which resources to use, how to use those resources, what are the best ways to search, and work through those processes so that they can then get the most out of the tools that we have access to. And then also I'm responsible for technical landscaping and trend analysis. And the technical part of that, I think, is the most important thing to note there, because there are pieces of information that I don't typically deal with. And those are the more marketing focused pieces of information. So things that I don't work with are things like voice of the customer, market segment analysis. We have a great team of very smart, very capable marketing folks who live with those pieces of and types of information on a daily basis. My role and the things that I deal with are much more on the technical side. And again, focused on that research part of research and development. And so in that role, and with those responsibilities, there are definitely some perspectives that I think are unique to the role of librarian, and making sure that people have got the right set of resources. And that, I think, helps inform how Sherwin-Williams R&D met Quid. As we looked at our first project for Quid, it wasn't a big, high visibility, high profile, really urgent project or question that we were trying to deal with. It was a very librarian-esque, sort of everyday, inconspicuous ask for assistance with one of those literature reviews that we talked about. Around a particular topic, the prevention of mold and mildew. And our team was just looking for ways to understand that space. Their question was around what kind of research is happening. So they wanted to look at peer-reviewed literature. So we're looking at journals and conference proceedings, and we've got sources to look for that information. So we check that box. We have that piece of the process down. We get the search just right, and we have all the terms that we need, and we narrow everything to the best of our ability, and we still come up with a fairly sizable body of literature. And really, it was no surprise to any of us. We'd sort of expected this as a broad ask, so we expected this to be somewhat of a big space. But then you have to answer the question of, well, how do I make that data valuable information, and how do I make sure that that brings value to the organization? How do you synthesize all that? How do you understand that space when you've got a couple hundred journal articles that you're now dealing with? And even on a good day, if you've got a team of researchers trying to comb through all of that, that's a lot for a team of people to read, particularly when they have other jobs and tasks that they need to work on, and they've got other work that needs to be done. And eventually they need to go home and eat and sleep and spend time with their families and do all these things. And dealing with that information cannot be their only job. So in working with trying to figure out how do you make that actionable and bring that value to the organization, we've got these great resources. Now what do we do with it? I had prior experience with Quid and thought, hey, maybe I know of this tool that might be able to help us process this information. So let's give it a shot and let's see what that looks like for us. And that first impression was an important one, as most first impressions tend to be, because it was a very low pressure, low risk, everyday sort of inconspicuous exercise that really helped serve as an introduction to how Quid can help find those patterns in those large bodies of literature, in those spaces that you're just trying to get an understanding of. And of course, helps those researchers get back to doing the other things that they need to do. And it makes the organization more efficient, and it makes the information that we get from other sources more valuable. And it's a way to make sure that all of those tools work together well to the benefit of the organization. And so we started thinking, well, what are other questions and insights that we can use Quid to help us deal with when we're dealing with those large spaces and those things that we really just want to try and get a high level understanding of. And we found a couple of different types of questions where Quid can be really helpful when we're dealing with those large spaces. And one of those things is, as we talked about with the literature review, breaking down those large technology spaces. And the information sources can vary from journal articles to patents to white papers to technical blogs and news articles. And one of the things that we wanted to look at from a very high level was the conversation around sustainability. Of course, that's a huge concern for everybody these days. The investment community is talking about it. Consumers are talking about it. Manufacturers are talking about it. So it's something that everybody wants to try and understand. But one of the things that we wanted to take a different look at was that conversation from the technical side. So we know what's happening in the investment community and how important it is to consumers, but what does the technology side of that look like? Because all these sustainable products and bio-based products need to be made of sustainable stuff and sustainable materials. So what does that technology space look like? So we did a search, and the network that was generated is the network that you see on the right-hand part of that slide. And of course, because it's a sustainability and a bio-based conversation, and this is just huge these days, not surprisingly, this is a fairly sizable network of things to deal with. But with this first look at the network, we were able to see which clusters were some of the larger ones, and are those clusters around either the functionality of these particular bio-based materials, or is it the applications where these things are finding the most use and where they're gaining the most traction? And then we can also look at those clusters and see where they're connected to other clusters. Are they connected to some of the smaller clusters, and what are those, the bridging nodes between those clusters? Are those of any importance or relevance, and what can we learn from those? And then we can also look at the other visualizations that Quid gives us the opportunity to use and look at the network from a timeline perspective. So we can see what the publishing looks like in terms of where are there spikes, where are there dips in publication, and try and figure out and understand what that means and why that's happening. And then we can also look at cluster maturity and see if maybe the smaller clusters are the younger, more emerging technologies, and are those older, larger clusters do they represent more foundational knowledge? And then you can go back to the network and see how those more mature clusters, if they are connected by any nodes to the younger clusters, because maybe there's some interesting aspect of how the technology is developing from that perspective. So we can begin to ask lots of different questions and see lots of different patterns. And then looking at it from the perspective of, okay, so we know what the space generally looks like. And now what does the actual materials look like? As I was looking through the clusters and trying to understand what those topics look like, there are certain materials that come up on a regular basis, and that's in patent technology and in journal articles. You see materials, bio-based materials that get a lot of mention. And so using the keyword search within the network was able to search for some specific materials, create tags around those materials, and then visualize that in the bar chart that you see on the left, which is where along the bottom you have some specific bio-based materials and some stuff that all these products are being made of, the count of the number of items that those terms appear in on the y-axis, and then the colors in the bar chart correspond back to the original clusters in the network. So you can see not only which materials are getting the most traction, but which clusters and which functionalities and applications they're showing up in the most often. And then as we're looking at new technology spaces and maybe things that are new to the coding space, but are already in use within other industries, we can get a sense of what industries are using those applications. This is a decidedly smaller network than some of the last ones that we've talked about and the last one that we looked at. And this is looking at peer-reviewed literature, so journal articles again, and just looking at a new material and something that we can easily take a good look at if there is any activity in the coding space. How are those nodes connected to some of the other industries that are doing active research in this area? And what can we learn from those other industries? In this case, there is some research going on in the polymer and films coding area, but that may not always be the case. But using this method, we can get a very quick high-level look at what things we can learn from other industries. And then, of course, a deeper analysis of patents is another area where Quid has been very helpful. And there are lots of questions that you can start to answer with a look at patents. This particular example is another instance where we did a patent search and then used the network search within the keyword search within the network to look at specific areas of interest or where emerging themes were starting to pop up. And then you can answer any number of questions around that. Which industries are the most active? Are there technology spaces that are similar or different? And start to think about all of the things that you can learn from those different perspectives. And so generally speaking, to sum all of that up, there are a few definite benefits of using Quid as an R&D tool to supplement all of the other information sources that we have and to help all of those sources work together well to the benefit of the organization. And the first one really is the visualization of information. When you're in the weeds in all those patents and journal articles, it's really hard to see where the patterns are at, where the connections are at. It might take you a while to get to the most valuable piece of information, don't know where to focus your attention. So if you can pull people back a little bit and get that high level view of the whole space and really understand what the whole picture looks like, then you can start to do these other things like focus your attention in the places where it's most important, where it's most useful, and where the most relevant information sits. And you can start to discover those patterns and connections that might not have otherwise been obvious. If you're 150 articles deep into a 300 article technology set, it's really hard to see where that 150th article might be connected to the 27th article. So you get a chance to not only see those connections, but also start to think in new ways and ask new questions that you may not have otherwise thought to ask, now that you can see things from a different perspective. And so I think there are some best practices that I have developed and that I find for using Quid as that R&D tool, as part of that R&D tool set. But I think this really applies to anybody using Quid. It doesn't necessarily have to be its use as an R&D tool, but I have definitely found that one of the most important things is to provide first-time viewers with some basics on how to read a Quid network, particularly in an R&D setting, because those folks tend to think very in a very linear fashion. And when you're first presented with a Quid network, you are presented with something that is most definitely not linear. So giving people some information on the nodes or the dots are the things that we're looking at. So whether it's patents or journal articles, and then look at how to look at the clusters and how to look at the center of the network and how those things are connected, and what the clusters that are a little bit further away from the center of the network, what those represent. Because then people start to ask questions about, okay, well, let's take a better look at that. And start to ask questions about, well, what's that connection mean? Or how do I interpret that? And then you can do things like describing your insights and your findings and highlighting those things that you found interesting while working with the data, because it does help people begin to see those patterns or ask new questions or think about things in a different way. And then anytime you can walk through an analysis in real time with somebody, whether it's through a PowerPoint presentation or if you're able to log into Quid and work with the data in real time, where they can ask questions and you can click on things and they can ask different questions, it helps make people sense. It helps people make sense of what they're seeing. And then as people become more accustomed to seeing those visualizations and thinking about those patterns, and then you find as an organization other questions that you can answer and information sources that can be supplemented with a Quid analysis, and you can begin to find other ways to use Quid to help bring that extra value to the other information sources that you have access to. And so that is all I have. Thank you again for your time and for joining me today, and looking forward to the rest of our Quid event. Harvey, I'll give it back to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Jamie. Lots of really interesting stuff in your presentation. And one of the things that I found really interesting is in use cases like yours, where we do work with a lot of folks who are in agencies or in comms functions within companies, but with you and your unique background, as well as your function around research and development, I think it's a great way to be able to showcase how people could use Quid and in helping to develop products and understand different nuances within some of the things that you're researching. So really appreciate the presentation and research that you did to put all this stuff together. We do have a couple of questions from our audience members, but what I'm going to do right now is supersede all that stuff, because I have to ask, is that Sherwin-Williams paint behind you on the wall? Because if it is, it's incredible. It's very creative product placement.
Of course it's Sherwin-Williams paint on the wall behind me. We wouldn't have anything but yes, we are, of course, everybody's working from home, so we are no different. And we are a family in the midst of some home improvement projects. So you have the opportunity to see on the wall behind me some of the Sherwin-Williams paint shades that we are considering for this particular space in the house.
That's awesome. All right, so we'll get to the real questions. I did mention earlier that because of the fact that you have such a unique background, both as your, with your perspective as a librarian and also your own professional background, how did that affect, or at least how did that influence the way that you took a look at Quid and how you approach your research using this platform?
I think it definitely has an influence on my perception of how Quid works and how it can work with the other R&D information, maybe more traditional librarian type tools that are out there. I have always been a fan of libraries and books and all of those types of things from a very young age. And then I spent some time working in bookstores before I decided to pursue the master's degree. And when I decided to pursue the master's degree in library and information science, I decided, well, I'm going to go for library and information science and information architecture and knowledge management, realizing that there's going to be this shift in librarianship in general, and there's just so much information and so much of it is born digital, and to really make any sense of it and for it to have any value to an organization, and for the profession of librarian to have any value to an organization going forward, there has to be that integration of the understanding of data and the transformation of data into information that is actionable and valuable and relevant, because there is so much of it out there and it's so easy to just gather stuff and not know what to do with it. And that perspective helped shape sort of my view of Quid. And then I've always been in these very technical R&D based organizations where the ability to help people not only find information, but again, how do you synthesize it and how do you make it actionable is so important. And that there are lots of tools for finding information. You can have all the right journal subscriptions and all the right databases, but in the end, if you can't do anything with that or empower people to find the information, either find the information themselves or help them on the path to making that information valuable to the organization, then you're not doing anybody any favors at that point. And so the use of Quid from that technical perspective, knowing that there are so many journal articles out there and we've got these huge technology spaces, and if you're going to find that thing that is the most important, you've got to have a way to do that, because people still have other jobs to do and other things that they need to do throughout their day. So this is a tool, along with all the journals and the patents and all the other library pieces of information that are out there, just helps it be that next step to being not just a librarian, but an information professional, and really being that, giving that extra value to the organization and really helping drive R&D and innovation and product development and all of those things forward.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. I think we have time for one more question. I'm trying to paraphrase this as best as I can. Before you begin your research, how do you determine the right data sources to start with? So I think this is in reference to some of the analysis that you presented earlier, where you use a number of different data sources. How do you determine which ones are the right data sources to start with? And once you've determined them, how do you typically start in your analysis?
So finding the right data source, really, for me, and I think it goes back to my general philosophy and my take on librarianship and how that fits within an R&D organization, is finding the right sources of information. Is really just about having a conversation with the people that you work with. There's no sense in them asking me a question and me going off and doing something and providing a list of stuff and saying, have a nice day. Analyze at your peril and make it a transactional type of thing, because nobody really benefits from that. The organization doesn't benefit from that. The researcher doesn't benefit from that. They don't learn anything about the resources that are available to them. I don't learn anything about the research that they're doing or how I can help the company. So really finding the right source is having that conversation and making each interaction a conversation, not a transaction, and making sure that I'm asking questions about what other background do they have about the topic, what other research have they already done, what sources are they already aware of, and what's the end goal? What question are they really trying to answer, so that we can determine, do you need journal articles and patents? Do you need technical white papers? Do you need news articles on from the technical blogs and websites that are out there? Is it one of those? Is it a combination of all of those? And then having that conversation also helps make sure you're using the right terms, and that if you need to refine a search a few times, that's okay, because that's just part of the process, and it's part of that conversation and that collaborative journey that the organization takes on that road to driving all those innovations and R&D and all of those activities that are part of what the organization is trying to accomplish.
Right. Awesome. Thanks so much, Jamie. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for questions. Like I mentioned earlier, we will be handing these questions off to Jamie, so even if we didn't have a chance to answer them during our session today, I'll try our best to be able to get back to you with any questions that you might have had. And again, we'd also like to encourage you to take a look at the agenda. We have more than 30 sessions that you could check out. Lots more interesting stuff, similar to some of the analysis that Jamie presented with us today. So we encourage you to explore, take a look at some of the other sessions, register for the ones that you're really interested in, and really just enjoy your time here. There's so much information, so much fun stuff that people are presenting that we encourage you to try and watch and enjoy as many of these as you possibly can. So for the team today, we'd like to thank you once again for joining us in this session, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your time at NetBase Quid Live.